Jackson Vance's fighter disintegrated into a brilliant white fireball against the hull of the final Dreadnought, leaving nothing behind but the silence of the void and Lyra's scream echoing across the bridge. The tactical display flickered, the human pilot's signature flatlining into a hollow gray static that signaled the end. Would you have made the same choice, or is human sacrifice a variable your logic simply can't compute? Subscribe and decide where you draw the line between heroism and madness. Now, let's look at the path that led to that fire. 6 months earlier, the station's atmospheric scrubbers had been the only sound in the sterile dressing room where Jackson buckled his ceremonial armor. To the galaxy, it was a treaty signed in blood. To him, it was a cage made of ceremonial armor. He moved with a heavy, rhythmic stiffness, his knuckles scarred from a lifetime of cockpits rather than ballrooms. I watched him from the shadows of the doorway, my data slate recording the minute tremors in his hands. As a high chronicler, I have documented 1,000 unions, but never one so quiet. Jackson didn't look like a groom. He looked like a man preparing for a long-term incarceration. Outside the viewport, the war against the entropic Blight raged on, a purple bruise across the stars. This marriage was the only thing keeping the coalition from fracturing, a transactional anchor intended to bind the human fleets to our own. The ceremony was a hollow display of lights and rehearsed vows. Lyra Solis stood tall, her expression a mask of porcelain duty. When Jackson took her hand, his grip was firm but devoid of warmth. They were two statues at the center of a propaganda storm. Peace, it seemed, was merely another theater of war. 3 weeks into the deployment, the routine shattered. We were monitoring a standard sweep near the Obsidian Rift when the Blight's interceptor screamed out of the nebula. "Vance, hold your line," the tactical commander barked over the comms. Jackson didn't answer. He had already banked his interceptor toward a cluster of distress beacons. His wingman, Kalen, was pinned down, his thrusters venting ionized gas like a wounded animal. Protocol demanded Jackson maintain the screen for the flagship. Logic dictated that one pilot was an acceptable loss for the safety of the high command. But Jackson Vance had never been particularly good at math. I watched the telemetry from the bridge of the Aegis Eternal. Beside me, Lyra Solis leaned forward, her fingers digging into the edge of the console. She didn't look away. Jackson was pulling 18 Gs, a maneuver that should have liquefied a human's internal organs. He dove into the heart of the enemy formation, his cannons carving a path through the dark. He didn't fight like a soldier following a script. He fought like a man trying to burn the stars down. In the chaos, Jackson deployed the tow cable magnetic latch. It was a primitive tool, a physical refusal to let go of a comrade. He hooked Kalen's crippled ship, dragging it through a gauntlet of fire while his own shields collapsed. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was entirely irrational. The bridge of the Aegis Eternal was a tomb of held breaths. Lyra didn't move as Jackson's signal dragged the wreckage of his wingman back into the hangar bay. He had survived, but the tactical edge was gone. The Blight had seen him now. They knew there was a pilot in the fleet who valued a single life over the formation. Logic says the pilot should have died in the first 10 seconds, but the Blight never accounted for human stubbornness. By the time the fleet reached the Obsidian Rift, the assault had reached its zenith. 3 enemy dreadnoughts emerged from the fold, their prow cannons glowing with the sick, necrotic green of entropic energy. They weren't targeting the fleet. They were targeting the Flaychick. They were targeting Lyra. The command deck shuddered. Warning klaxons wailed in a dissonant chord. "The shields won't hold another volley," the tactical officer reported, his voice devoid of hope. Jackson's voice crackled over the secure channel, stripped of its usual grit. "Lyra, get the fleet out of here. I'm closing the gap." "Vance, stand down," Lyra commanded, but her voice lacked its usual steel. "That's a suicide run. It's an investment," he replied. I watched his ship break formation, a lone spark against the wall of shadow. He wasn't just flying. He was calculating. Humans often view their emotions as a weakness, a chaotic noise that interferes with the signal of survival. But in the chronicler's records we see the truth. The neural pathways of a human in a state of self-sacrifice undergo a fundamental rewrite. Fear is replaced by a singular, hyper-focused purpose that transcends biological limits. This berserker state allows them to process tactical data at speeds that baffle our most advanced AI. It is the evolution of trauma into a weapon. Jackson's interceptor accelerated, weaving through a lattice of point defense fire that should have been impassable. He didn't fire his main cannons. He was saving the reactor's output for the impact. And then, we were back to the moment the stars screamed. Jackson Vance's fighter disintegrated into a brilliant white fireball against the hull of the final Dreadnought. The explosion was absolute. It was a sun born in a second, a purging light that turned the enemy's own reactors into a chain reaction of glass and gas. Lyra's scream was the only sound on the bridge until the shock wave hit, tossing the massive flagship like a leaf in a gale. Then, the silence of the void returned. 5 days passed in a hollow, mourning orbit. We searched the debris field not out of hope, but out of a sense of ritual. When the long-range scanners finally picked up a faint rhythmic ping, the bridge erupted. The emergency pod was a crumpled husk, barely holding atmosphere. Inside, Jackson Vance was alive, but different. His neural signatures had been altered by the sheer energy of the blast. He was quieter now, his eyes reflecting a depth of space that hadn't been there before. He and Lyra didn't speak when he was brought aboard. They didn't need to. The bond started as a checkbox on a diplomatic manifest. It ended as the only thing keeping the fleet together. The war isn't over, but the rift is quiet today. Jackson and Lyra stand on the observation deck, watching the flickering trails of a new generation of pilots. He isn't wearing his armor anymore. He is holding a simple, scarred piece of metal, the tow cable magnetic latch from his old ship. It no longer represents a tool of war. It is a reminder that some things, once caught, are never meant to be let go. The stars are indifferent to our treaties, but they remember the fire we leave behind. Does true unity require a common enemy, or just the courage to ignore the math of survival? Join us for the next chronicle as we explore the legends that define the frontier.